do you create a scatter plot? Let's begin by reviewing what a scatter plot is. A scatter plot is a graph which shows the relationship between two quantities. Pairs of data are graphed on a coordinate plane. Here is a scatter plot where the data pairs represent hours of studying and test scores. As we can see on the graph, the test scores increased as the number of hours of studying increased. There are 4 steps to follow in order to create a scatter plot. We are going to create a scatter plot where the data pairs represent Allison's age and Allison's height. And here is our data set. The first step in this process is to identify the independent and dependent variables. Since Allison's height depends on her age, we would identify the independent variable as age and the dependent variable as height. It is important to identify the independent and dependent variables because this information will determine how we label the axes. The second step in our process is to set up the axes for our scatter plot. The independent variable, Allison's age, will be placed on our horizontal or x-axis, and the dependent variable, Allison's height, will be placed on our vertical or y-axis. Now that we have the axes labeled, we need to put an appropriate scale on each axis. This brings us to step 3 of the process. To determine an appropriate scale, let's review our data. The information for Allison's age ranges from 1 to 8. Therefore, we can start at 0 on the x-axis and use a scale of a half a year. For the y-axis, we need to determine an appropriate scale for Allison's height data. We have many choices. If we start at 0, we can use a scale of 3 and fit all of our data points. Now that we have our axes scaled, let's plot our points. The first data point is 1 year, 31 inches. I went to 1 year on the x-axis and up to 31 inches following the y-axis to plot this first point. Let me plot the rest of our data points. With all of our data points on the graph, we can see there is a pattern. As Allison grew older, she grew taller. We would say that there is a positive relationship between Allison's age and her height. Now that you have seen the construction of a scatter plot, let's review the 4 steps. Step number 1. Identify the independent and dependent variables in your data. Step number 2. Set up the axes for your graph. Your independent variable will be placed on the horizontal axis, and the dependent variable will be placed on the y-axis, or the vertical axis. Step number 3. Set up scales for each of the axes. And step number 4. Plot the points.